Let's see if I can find an example of what I'm talking about here to show you. Here's one here. I don't know if the little tuft there that's still on. Here we go. All right, so it's got this little thing right there, right? Hey, it's Greg here with MaritimeGardening.com, and I'm just out here in the garden doing some work. And a number of plants that I've let go to seed, I've let flower and go to seed, are at various stages of that process. And I thought it made sense to just do a video on that, because I imagine there's probably a growing interest in seed saving among some people. And I do a bit of that every year. I'm not completely, I mean, everything I grow in my garden is not from saved seeds. I buy seeds like everybody else, and I like trying new things as well. It's always fun to try new varieties. But anyway, I think, I often get the question like, when are the seeds ready, right? When is it time to harvest the seeds? So I thought I'd show you a couple different plants at various stages of seed development. So, and also just those particular plants if you're interested in that, so you can get a sense of that, okay? So come on, let's have a look around. All right, so this is an interesting one. This is carrot. So usually when so carrot's a biennial plant, that it's a root vegetable that doesn't produce a seed in its first year. It doesn't make a flower in its first year. It has to grow and then go dormant for the winter and then come back in the spring, and in the second year, biennial, 2-year, 2-year cycle sort of thing. 2-year cycle to maturity, I guess, is another way of looking at it. It grows. The carrot's no good, but it becomes very bitter and not very useful, but it basically makes a seed head. Now, it looks like a lot of wild weeds, and it's related to a lot of wild weeds. That's what the flower looks like. But these ones, it's not ready for seed saving yet. The flowers haven't even reached their sort of full floweriness. What you're looking for is the flowers are fully open. There's butterflies and bees and things like that buzzing around it a lot. And then the flowers start to look kind of ugly and kind of dead. And then they're so dead, they're practically, well, they just stop behaving like flowers, right? And that's when you can leave them on there until the seeds are literally falling off of them. Or you can put them in some place if you want to be more in control of the situation. You just cut the whole thing off and hang it upside down to dry somewhere. And then once those seeds are good and dry, like for me, that's, depending on what the plant is, sometime in August, because it's a drier part of the year here, I want to get those things put away and preserved, because sometime in September, October, it starts becoming more wet, more foggy, and humid, and so on and so forth. It's always some degree of humid, but it just becomes more humid in the fall. It's not as good for saving seeds. Anyway, so these carrots, where I am, this is beginning of July, they're not ready yet, right? But that's what a carrot looks like. And it's very rare that for me a carrot survives the winter. Usually the carrot turns to mush. But this was, I can't remember the name of the variety, but some kind of old world, heirloom type variety. Most of the carrots I grow here, they just turn to mush. This one seemed to survive the winter. There was a few I just didn't happen to pick, and they started growing again. So I thought, well, I'm going to save some seeds from that. It was a really weird carrot too, kind of almost beet-like in shape, short, fat, and big, and very good tasting. So I'm going to save some seeds from this. Here's a parsnip that's gone to seed, and I mean, this plant is covered in ants, and probably because I wouldn't be surprised if there's aphids. I find aphids tend to be drawn to parsnips, and I find to get a lot of aphids on parsnips. Also a tent caterpillar, for whatever reason, seem to like to set up shop on parsnips. So one might say it's a good trap plant. I'm not so sure about that, but it's certainly a good plant for attracting aphids to your garden. Anyway, I have an open pollinated variety, I think it's called Hollow Crown, of parsnip that I grow, and I leave a couple in the ground every year and let them go to seed. This is one of them. It's not ready yet. Okay, so the flowers haven't opened. I think these become, I can't remember if they become white or yellow. Yeah, there's one there. So this, yeah, is a good example. So these are sort of tied to, I think there's some sort of aphid nest in that one there, right? And for the most part with these, I just sort of let nature sort itself out. If I really am having a problem with aphids such that I think I'm going to lose the whole plant, I might blast it with a bit of insecticidal soap or put the hose on it or whatever. It really depends on how bad it is. Generally, I just like to let nature take its course. And I think if there's a plant covered in aphids, it's going to draw in things that eat the aphids. I tend to see a lot of ladybugs on these and so on and so forth. Anyway, I'm getting distracted because I'm anticipating all the different comments that come up when I mention things like aphids. Anyway, this is a parsnip and it's going to flower. It's not flowering yet, and this thing, it should be just buzzing with, you know, different flying insects that are trying to gather that the nectar from the flowers. It's not there yet. But these will, basically the seeds will be brown, you know, what's that color I'm looking for? Blonde or brown, and, you know, fully swelled, and yeah, almost, you know, basically if you can snap off one of these seed heads and give it a whack and they fall off, it's definitely ready to harvest the seeds, but you can harvest them a bit more than that. Basically, once the plant loses its green color, starts to go off color, and you know, the seeds are more like, here's a head. I'll show you an example. So get the ant off of there, get out of there. Two different stages of development. All right, so here's seeds that aren't really developed at all, right? And then off the same plant, for whatever reason, these ones are a little bit more, so you can see the seeds are sort of forming, right? They're still not ready yet, right? So so it looks like these flowers have come and gone and we've got the seeds. But these will be kind of like a blonde, light brown color when they're ready to be harvested. So this is going to take another 3 weeks or so, right? This interesting little dandy here is actually kale. This is a kale flower, and it's, I mean, you can just tell from eating the greens, definitely kale. This is a kale plant I had last year. There's an interesting beetle on it. Anyway, so this is a kale that has begun to flower. It's a very small kale, and it's probably not worth, you know, every 4 years I take a huge kale of the wild variety like I like to grow here, and I protect it all winter long. I don't find kale tends to survive the winter. This one did, but it's not really worth, you know, there's just nothing there. But I like to take one of my bigger wild kale, white Russian kale, or Siberian kale I think it's called, and I protect it over the course of the winter. I'll take a few of them because they don't all make it, and one of them will create this 4-foot high plant with these sort of pea looking things. The flowers become something like a pea. So this is a very tiny version of that, but you can see they're becoming like a pea. If I remember later in this video, I'll show what they look like when they're a bit more finished. I got one that I saved last year that's all dried out and everything. I can show it to you. And I've done videos on this too. Maybe I'll put a link to one at the end. But anyway, each of these flowers becomes kind of like a pea or a bean, and inside that is the tiny little mustard seed type kale. So yeah, for these you want to wait till that sort of pea pod type thing is completely dry and almost like you can rattle the seeds around in it. For me, that tends to be like August, you know. Here's a lettuce plant that's bolting, and it hasn't made its flower yet, but it's about to, right? So I'm just going to let this, and usually when I'm letting something go to flower to save seeds, I like to have a few of them so they can cross-pollinate. I'm always concerned that the plant won't be self-pollinating, and I mean, you could look it up and read about it and all that sort of stuff, but it's just easier to have 2 or 3 of them kicking around. So also you're just adding more random variation into the equation, so chances are, you know, you're just improving your chances of getting good viable seeds out of it. So this is an heirloom variety of lettuce. I can't remember what it's called, but it's pretty good tasting, almost like a butter lettuce or a Boston lettuce. So yeah, I'm going to let this go to flower and save the seeds, but the flowers haven't even opened yet, so it's probably going to be another month for these. This interesting looking plant is salsify, and it makes this kind of pretty purple flower. And you'll notice most of them are open, but some of them aren't. So this particular one, very few of the flowers are open, and it's because it's done flowering. So I mean, that's kind of what you're looking for. Like the one over here, it's got a lot of flowers showing, so it's still, you know, it's still doing its flowering thing. Whereas this particular one, which is about, say, all of this, there's only a couple flowers really showing. Most of the heads have sort of are done flowering. You can tell that because they've got a kind of fine hair like that sticking out the end, right? So it's sort of done doing what flowers do to make viable seeds. I'm trying to find an example, but there might even be a little tuft on top of this that if you touch it, it falls off. Let's see if I can find an example of what I'm talking about here to show you. Here's one here. I don't know if the little tuft there that's still on. Here we go. All right, so it's got this little thing right there, right? And it's just ready to come off, right? Once you see that, at least for a plant like, I mean, every plant's different, but you know, a flower like this that closes up like that, once it closes and stops opening, that's when you can just cut the whole thing off at the base and hang it upside down somewhere out of the weather. I mean, if you live in a dry place, you don't need to, but where I live, I have to sort of hang it in my gardening shed to get it out of the weather so it can properly dry. So for me, look at this one. It's basically busting up already. This one's really done. See how it's opening up? You can see the salsify seeds right ready. So another few days, when I see more of them like this, right, that's when I'll cut this. This is just one plant, this whole space here. There's 3 plants here, and they're basically filling half of this thing, right? They get really big when they go to seed. But I'll cut these off at the base, hang them upside down, then I'll have an almost infinite number of salsify seeds. Here's an example of kale that's, you know, fully mature, fully dried out and everything like that. So it creates these little pods like this. And each one of these pods has a, you open them up and you get the seeds, right? Little tiny black seeds. I got a whole video on how I gather these and save them and that sort of thing. If you want, I'll put a link to that at the end. Anyway, it looks like a light rain is starting to happen here. Not really enough to water the garden in any meaningful way, but enough to wreck my camera up. So I gotta wrap her up. But yeah, just a couple examples of plants that I'm saving the seeds of that are beginning to flower in various stages of that process. Things to look for and so on and so forth. I mean, the easiest way to know when to harvest the seeds is if you take the flower, you know, snap it off, hold it upside down, give it a whack against your hand. If the seeds start falling out of the flower, it's definitely time to get those, you know, to save the seeds. But basically what you're looking for is when the flower is done being a flower and it's starting to collapse, you know, or just slightly before then. And especially if you live somewhere that gets a lot of rain, you know, there's a perfect time when, let's say you've had the flower's done being a flower, and you get like 3 or 4 or 5 really sunny days, so that it can get good and dry. And you cut it off, just hang the whole thing upside down somewhere out of the weather, leave it like that for a few weeks to just get completely dry, and so that you can put the seeds in a little, you know, paper package and save them for the following year. So anyway, I hope you found that interesting. If you did, please like, share, subscribe. Check out my podcast, maritimegardening.com. And until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your garden. Thanks for watching.